Hey everyone, this is Glenn Greenwald. Welcome to a special edition of System Update, which I am recording because I wanted to discuss an issue with you that I thought was by far most conducive to video, in large part because it's been playing out over video. And it may seem at first like this is a somewhat trivial or petty topic to examine, and I think it could be if it were done in a certain way, but the way that I want to do it, I don't believe it's petty or trivial at all. In fact, I think quite the contrary. It highlights and underscores extremely important pathologies that are plaguing liberal left political discourse specifically and our Western politics generally. And it's a very vivid window through which to see how these cancers are metastasizing and spreading and becoming increasingly normalized. Now, nominally, the episode that we're about to examine is a very protracted and what has become complex and vitriolic war between a variety of center-left and left-wing commentators, principally on YouTube, and it has involved a whole variety of exchanges of accusations, which I'm absolutely not going to delve into, nor arbitrate, nor even try and recount or describe, because I think if I did, that would make it trivial, and that's exactly what I'm not going to do. What I'm going to do instead is use what's been happening as a microcosm for really vividly seeing what are two very pernicious trends that I think need to be combated. In fact, are long past time to be obliterated. So the episode in question is a conflict that is still raging between, as I said, a variety of principally YouTube commentators, large ones with a large audience, such as Cenk Uygur and Ana Kasparian, who are the longtime stars of the Young Turks, which is, I think, the largest or one of the largest center-left or liberal outlets on YouTube, as well as the journalist Aaron Mate, who writes for The Gray Zone and was one of the few left-wing skeptics of Russiagate, as well as Jimmy Dore, who hosts his own show on YouTube. And as I said, I want to avoid the personal drama and instead focus on what I think matters. And there are things that matter here because they relate to and illustrate broader themes. Now, this has been going on for a few weeks, and I think one of the things that's really worth noting is that it all began with a segment that Cenk Uygur and Ana Kasparian did about the journalist Aaron Mate. And it doesn't much matter what provoked it, but essentially Cenk had posted a tweet about the Israel-Gaza conflict that literally thousands, if not tens of thousands of people ridiculed rightly. I was one of them because it tried to claim that the entire Israeli-Palestine conflict is about nothing more than sky gods and which person believes in which sky god. It was incredibly trite and reductive and primitive and dumb. And Aaron Mate was one of the people of the thousands who mocked and criticized Cenk's tweet for trying to reduce such a complicated geopolitical conflict down to something so moronic and such a dumb platitude. And for whatever reason, Cenk decided that Aaron in particular's criticism by Aaron really bothered him. And so on May 26th, he and his co-host, Ana Kasparian, quickly referenced the criticism of Aaron Mate of Cenk's position on Israel-Gaza. And instead of describing the criticism and then proceeding to engage it and refute it, or even instead of mocking it and ridiculing it, they didn't even talk about the criticism that Aaron had expressed at all of those views on Israel and Gaza. Instead, what they proceeded to do is something that has become extremely commonplace in liberal media and in liberal politics. And because it's so commonplace, we are starting to overlook how odious and pernicious and toxic and destructive and reprehensible it is. In particular, what they did was, in response to Aaron Mate's criticism, they accused Aaron, Cenk accused Aaron of being, quote, paid by the Russians. Paid by the Russians. He just spit it out as though it were fact. And Anna Kasparian, in a way, went even further because she didn't even state anything definitively. She used vague innuendo to say that she believes that Aaron Mate is working for despicable dictators, presumably Bashar al-Assad in Syria and Vladimir Putin in Russia, although she didn't say, which makes it worse because when innuendo is ambiguous, it's harder to engage or to refute. But just watch this short segment and to see how these tactics are so casually and breezily used by Democratic Party loyalists, liberal left commentators, and people adjacent to them. Just watch it for yourself.
Said Aaron Mate yelled at me. And so
Aaron Mate lied. Aaron Mate. Everyone cares what Aaron Mate has to say, right?
Okay.
The guy who denies that Syrian children were killed with chemical attacks. Yeah.
And
fuck
gets
Aaron
paid by
Mate.
the...
Fuck you.
Anyway,
let's move on.
Russians.
Let's end the freaking pod. I can't.
Okay, see, that's what happens.
I can't stand that guy, and I can't stand the very intentional disinformation they put out there in regard to disgusting dictators around the world. The very people they seem to be working for, to be quite honest with you. Let's move on.
No, I just want to play that again because it's only about a minute long, and just focus on what it is they did here. This is what started this entire conflagration. They went and spoke to presumably their large audience of members, and because they were criticized by a journalist, they just stated flatly that journalist is paid by the Russians and is working for some of the world's worst dictators. Just watch it again. Listen to what they said.
Said Aaron Mate yelled at me. And so
Aaron Mate lied. Aaron Mate. Everyone cares what Aaron Mate has to say, right?
Okay.
The guy who denies that Syrian children were killed with chemical attacks. Yeah.
And
fuck
gets
Aaron
paid
Mate.
by the...
Fuck you.
Anyway,
let's move on.
Russians.
Let's end the freaking pod. I can't.
Okay, see, that's what happens.
I can't stand that guy, and I can't stand the very intentional disinformation they put out there in regard to disgusting dictators around the world. The very people they seem to be working for, to be quite honest with you. Let's move on.
Now, there are a lot of topics raised by the preceding debate that people feel very strongly about. Israel and Gaza is obviously one of them. Russia is another. The civil war in Syria and the U.S. role in it is yet another, that raise a lot of emotions, a lot of passions, a lot of debate, a lot of strong feelings. That's all well and fine. That's what political discourse is for, is debating, sometimes very vitriolically and aggressively, policy disputes that matter. But what they did there is something completely different. They accused somebody, a journalist, of being paid by the Russians, even though Cenk Uygur, who made that accusation, has no evidence of any kind to support that accusation, let alone proof. He doesn't even have any grounds for reasonable suspicion that it's true, but even if he did, it wouldn't make it any justifiable because you note that he said it as fact. Aaron Mate is the guy who is paid by the Russians. He's paid by a foreign government, a foreign adversary of the United States. He's an agent of a foreign power. That's what Cenk Uygur said about Aaron Mate with no evidence whatsoever. And then Anna went further, Anna Kasparian, and said that she believes, it seems, she said, that Aaron Mate and unnamed others are, to be honest, very candid, she's being, working for the despicable dictators that she believes they're defending. And so that was on May 26th. We are now a month and a week later. They have never apologized for those comments, presented evidence for them, retracted them, even though they have caused an enormous tumult in liberal left politics with lots of people being dragged in to the war that ensued as a result of those accusations. So the reason why I want to highlight this is two reasons. One is, how can any decent person, no matter your politics, no matter what you think about those people involved, no matter what you think about those issues that they were nominally reacting to, or the ideologies that people, regardless of any of your views on that, how can any decent person continue to accept that somebody who claims to be a journalist or claims to be a commentator telling the truth about things is now just allowed, whenever they feel like it, whenever they get a little itch inside, to just accuse somebody of being a paid agent of the Kremlin or working for foreign dictators, even though they have no evidence for it? How in any way, is that tolerable or permissible in our discourse? How can you possibly be somebody who watches that program or who in any way admires those two commentators or think they're doing good work and not be indignant that they're feeding you lies, things that they just make up, fabrications in order to slander their critics? It's such an insult to your intelligence if you're watching that. And it's just mind-boggling to watch that people believe that they have the prerogative to do that, to accuse somebody of grave transgressions, of what are crimes, even though they will acknowledge they have no evidence at all that it's true. They're just making it up and broadcasting it, publishing it to hundreds of thousands of people. Who isn't angry about this? It's as morally repulsive and ethically disgusting and journalistically indefensible as it gets. There's almost nothing worse you can do if you're participating in public discourse than deliberately and casually smear somebody while knowing that you have no evidence. And yet there are plenty of people who have commented on that episode and the ensuing controversy who cannot get past their third grade mentality of who they like and who they dislike, or which side of the political debate they fall, who just are willing to sanction it and overlook it and not care about it or denounce it or demand evidence for it or a retraction if none is presented, because they're incapable of viewing the world through any degree of principle or with regard to any just minimally ethical standard, like just the basement for what should be required to permit people to participate in public discourse is that you do not go around hurling accusations as truth while knowing that you have no evidence to corroborate them. And yet that's exactly what they did, and there are dozens of high-profile liberals who have taken their side and never once said, well, even though I'm on their side, the one thing I really dislike and actually don't accept and want them to apologize for and withdraw are these very serious accusations. This is the state of liberal discourse in the United States. And that's why I think this is so worth doing. If it were just an isolated incident involving Cenk Inanna and Aaron Mate, I would have no interest in talking about it because they're just not significant enough to take your time with. It would just be an isolated, shitty act that they did that can rest on their conscience if they want, and is between them and their audience to work out. Why am I commenting on this? Why am I illustrating this point and showing you this video and drawing these conclusions from them? It's because this has become so frequent. It has become a defining attribute of what you can really say is the dominant political faction in the United States, which is the liberal faction of the Democratic Party, the liberal left faction of the Democratic Party. The last 5 years in the United States, beginning with the 2016 campaign through the Trump years and now continuing through today, as we just saw, that video that you just watched, that nauseating video, was 5 months after Joe Biden was inaugurated and Trump has left. It has been dominated by this theme that everybody's a Russian agent, that anyone that you don't like, you can just accuse of being paid by the Kremlin, paid by Putin, controlled by Putin. The dominant theme of the Trump presidency, not from random trolls on Twitter or little groups on Facebook, but from mainstream sectors of corporate media, was that the Russians had infiltrated American institutions and taken over our politics, and that they have all kinds of clandestine Russian agents running around the country to influence American politics. It is demented and deranged. It is no worse than anything that they isolate and identify on QAnon or Alex Jones or whoever their favorite conspiracy monger is to mock and to beat up. And yet, because it's so commonplace and so mainstream, people don't really, we're conditioned to either laugh at it if we see the absurdity of it, or to believe it, to think that it's a legitimate tactic to use when engaging in political discourse. So let me just give you a few examples. About 2 weeks ago, as my readers know, I reported on a lawsuit that was brought against MSNBC host Rachel Maddow by the pro-Trump right-wing cable network One American News, OAN. And the lawsuit ultimately concluded in Rachel Maddow's favor. It was a defamation lawsuit, not because the court said that what she had said was true, but quite the contrary. MSNBC's lawyers argued and the court accepted that everyone who watches Rachel Maddow knows that she's not really saying anything factual. She's using exaggeration, she's using hyperbole, she's using melodrama, she's inserting her own opinions in order to make a point, that everyone knows it's not a real news program. That's the only reason she won, because her lawyers ultimately argued, and the court ultimately accepted that no one really believes that what she's saying is factual. But remember what it is that she said that gave rise to that lawsuit. She was talking about OAN, and she said, quote, "What you're hearing from OAN, quote, really, literally, is paid Russian propaganda." Now, nobody thinks that about OAN. No matter how low you hold OAN in your esteem, there's no evidence that what they're broadcasting, quote, really, literally is paid Russian propaganda. And yet no one minds that Rachel Maddow said that, precisely because it is so accepted in American politics. Another major example that I'm sure a lot of you remember is during the 2019-2020 presidential race, when Tulsi Gabbard was still a candidate running for the Democratic nomination, and she was quite critical of Hillary Clinton's warmongering and regime change obsessions and foreign policy. Remember also that in 2016, Tulsi Gabbard was the vice chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee under Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and she very publicly resigned in protest over what she regarded as DNC cheating against Bernie Sanders and on behalf of Hillary Clinton, a claim that ultimately was more than vindicated when Julian Assange and WikiLeaks reported the evidence that proved it was true, and the top 5 DNC officials, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz, were forced to resign because they got caught cheating. They got caught in their corruption. So Hillary Clinton obviously harbored a grudge against Tulsi Gabbard when Gabbard was criticizing Hillary Clinton's imperialism, which is a perfectly appropriate thing to do when you're running for president. How did Hillary Clinton respond when talking about this woman who was a veteran of the Iraq War who volunteered to fight for her country? The same way that Cenk Uygur and Ana Kasparian tried to smear their critic, Aaron Mate, the same way that Rachel Maddow tried to malign OAN despite having no evidence by implying or stating that she's a Russian agent. Hillary Clinton, in an interview, when asked, said, quote, "I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who is currently in the Democratic primary," meaning the Russians. They've got their eye on somebody who is currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. This was in a podcast with former Obama advisor David Plouffe. She said, quote, "She's the favorite of the Russians." That's what she said about Tulsi Gabbard, that the Kremlin was grooming Tulsi Gabbard to run as a third-party candidate to siphon votes away from the ultimate Democratic nominee and re-elect Donald Trump. A completely deranged, unhinged hallucination that came out of Hillary Clinton's head and then through her mouth onto a podcast that, again, no one holds, or very few people hold, against Hillary Clinton, because in liberal politics, in mainstream liberal politics, notice I'm not picking out trolls, anonymous Twitter trolls. I'm citing the most influential people in liberal discourse and in liberal politics. In that realm, it is completely acceptable to wield this as a weapon. This tactic in Democratic Party politics is so commonplace now. It's as rancid as it is common, that it would take me hours to chronicle even the leading examples and days, if not weeks, to document them all. But I obviously have some of my own personal experience with that as somebody who has been a leading skeptic of the whole Russiagate scandal from the start. I cannot count how many times I've been accused of being a paid Russian agent, not, again, by just random people on Twitter, but by major voices in liberal media. In fact, just 2 months ago in May, I criticized Joe Scarborough for having praised Liz Cheney as some sort of noble, truth-telling patriot. And in response, just like Cenk Uygur did with Aaron Mate, just like Rachel Maddow did with OAN, just like Hillary Clinton did with Tulsi Gabbard, he ignored the substance of my critique and instead used the standard Democratic Party smear, which was to imply strongly that I'm a Russian agent. He tweeted, quote, over my tweet, criticizing him, "Comrade, wrong again, but in your defense, this probably reads better in the original Russian." It doesn't even make any sense. Comrade is a term that Soviet communists used. Russia's not even a communist country anymore, but it doesn't matter. They're so immersed in this iconography and this smear tactic that it doesn't matter if it makes any sense anymore. So he says my tweet was written in the original Russian, and using comrade implies that I'm some sort of a Russian or Kremlin agent. When I was at The Intercept and we were publishing investigations of Howard Dean and his sleazy lobbyist activity, that became a common trope of his as well. Again, never to address the substance of the reporting that we were doing, but instead to imply the same thing. Back in 2016, after somebody pointed to The Intercept's reporting, he tweeted, quote, would be interesting to find out if The Intercept gets money from Russia or Iran. Would be interesting. They use innuendo when they're not using defamatory assertions, which, as I said before, is in a lot of ways worse because you can't then hold them accountable. They say, well, I'm just asking questions. I can't tell you how many times I've been accused explicitly of being a Russian agent by many MSNBC hosts like Joy Reid. Probably the one who did it most commonly is the former intelligence operative, one of the hundreds seemingly that works for MSNBC, Malcolm Nance, who has accused me of this over and over and over and then continues to get a paycheck from MSNBC every time he does it. Just one example was I made a trip to Moscow in 2018 to participate in a media event, and when I got back, he went on Twitter and said, quote, read this. Glenn Greenwald shows his true colors as an agent of Trump in Moscow. Now we know why he helped Snowden defect. Covers for WikiLeaks' attack on democracy and shills for Fox News. He's deep in the Kremlin pocket. I'm deep in the Kremlin pocket and I'm a Russian agent. You're allowed to say that about a journalist, even though you have no whiff of evidence, and still be on the MSNBC payroll and be invited on to talk to their audience about the news. Malcolm Nance, Hillary Clinton, Howard Dean, Joe Scarborough, Rachel Maddow, Cenk Uygur, they all do the same thing. And the reason they get away with it is because liberals support it. They don't care if their adversaries are smeared with lies, blatant lies, that they're just fabrications that get hurled. That's why they all get away with it. That's why there are no consequences to it. There's why there's no accountability to it. And it's why liberal politics and liberal discourse is so rotted and corrupted at the core. So that's one reason I wanted to examine this controversy, was because it all began with something that deserves a lot more attention, which is that media figures feel completely free to fabricate out of thin air allegations that someone is a paid agent of the Kremlin. It all began when Cenk said about Aaron, he's paid by the Russians. Cenk is a liar. He fabricated that. He'll never retract it, because in the liberal circles in which he swims, in which he floats, that is a perfectly acceptable thing to do, even when people know you have no evidence for it, that you've invented it out of thin air. Now I want to turn to the second component of this conflict that also merits a lot of attention for the same reason. Well beyond this conflict, it's become a very common, destructive, toxic tactic in liberal discourse. So after Cenk and Anna went on their show and said what I just showed you they said about Aaron Mate, one of the people who objected, there were many, I was one of them, but one of the people who objected was Jimmy Dore, who hosts a very popular show on YouTube. He used to work at the Young Turks. That's where, in a way, he got his start commenting on politics. He knows all of them. He worked there for many years. When he left in 2015 or 2016 to do his own show, it was very amicable. He said nice things about them. They said nice things about him, but he wanted to go and work on his own. But lately, he's been escalating his criticisms of the Young Turks' politics. He had a strategy called Force the Vote, where he wanted the squad to refuse to vote for Nancy Pelosi as speaker, which would have prevented her from getting elected, unless she agreed to bring their healthcare policy to the floor for a floor vote. And it caused a big split on the left because a lot of people don't ever want any pressure being placed on the squad, let alone criticism of them. So this conflict has been escalating for some time, but it's been confined to the realm of policy. They've been arguing about political strategy, political ideology, and the like, which again is completely appropriate. But once Jimmy defended Aaron and criticized the Young Turks for having accused Aaron of being a Russian agent and working for dictators, that complete lie that they fabricated with no accountability, this is the message that Jimmy Dore got in his private DM mailbox on Twitter from Anna Kasparian that I want to show you. So let's put this on the screen. So as you can see, this is from Anna Kasparian to Jimmy Dore. The last time they had any exchange on DMs in Twitter was back in 2016, so 5 years ago. And it was not just pleasant, it was very, very, very friendly. This is after Jimmy left the Young Turks. And he sent Anna a message because he had heard that her mother was in the hospital saying, quote, "I had no idea your mom was in surgery. So glad to hear it went well. Hashtag best thoughts." And she replied instantly, "Thank you, Jimmy. Watching you guys kick ass right now." So obviously there was a lot of admiration. There was a lot of friendship between those two in 2016, the last time they spoke, at least by DM. All of that changed on June 11th. As Jimmy was criticizing the Young Turks for having lied about Aaron being a paid agent of the Kremlin, when he got into his DM box a message, this message that I'm going to put on the screen, from Anna Kasparian, the first one she sent him, at least by Twitter, in 5 years since that very positive exchange last time, which said the following, quote, "I'm sure you remember when you constantly made inappropriate comments about how sexy you found me at work, and even felt the need to ask me where I shop for my jeans so you can buy a pair for your wife so she dresses better. That was followed by an apology card you wrote me for the degrading harassment. I've been holding back, letting you run your mouth nonstop as if you're some sort of warrior for what's good in the world. That's going to change." Do you see what she did there? Now, since this DM was sent, Jimmy anticipatorily went and showed his audience this threat, which is what this is, that she sent him. A threat that she's going to accuse him of sexual harassment because of the things that he's been saying about the Young Turks. And he gave his own version of events about what happened. She then went on her own program and made good on her threat by accusing him of a series of harassment. I have no idea what took place back in 2014 when they were working together because I wasn't there. But here's what so I can't comment on whether anyone did anything wrong back then, but this is what I can comment on. Anna Kasparian was not Jimmy Dore's subordinate at the Young Turks. Quite the contrary, if anything, she was quite senior to him. She's been the co-host of the main program and one of its stars from its inception, more or less. If anything, she was his boss at the Young Turks. And yet, according to her own version of events, and according to Jimmy's as well, she never once voiced a complaint about being sexually harassed by Jimmy Dore in the workplace. to the Young Turks. In fact, Cenk Uygur, who's the CEO or the president of the Young Turks, said that he never heard about any of this until she made good on that threat in order to use it against him. So she never, in the course of this 7 years, uttered a peep about claiming to have been sexually harassed by Jimmy Dore. In fact, in 2016, as I just showed you, they had a very amicable exchange. He was wishing her well on her mother's surgery, and she said, "Thank you so much, and it's so great to see how much you're kicking ass." That's not the exchange that one would expect from someone who actually feels like they were maliciously and systematically sexually harassed by someone else, but maybe it is. Maybe that did happen, and for whatever reason, she decided to keep it to herself. That happens a lot where women are actually harassed or otherwise victimized, and they choose not to come forward. That's their right, and that happens a lot. That fact that someone doesn't come forward doesn't mean nothing happened. But what she's doing here is as grotesque as it is transparent. She kept it in her back pocket. And she's saying to him, "I've not said anything this whole time, but now that you're criticizing us so much from this position of purity and morality, I'm now going to use it. I've kept it to myself. That's going to change." This is reprehensible. To weaponize claims of sexual harassment against somebody as punishment for their criticism of you. It's reprehensible for two reasons. One is because it is grotesque to try and ruin somebody's reputation over something like this because you're angry that they're criticizing your politics. But it's also reprehensible because exploiting and weaponizing claims of Me Too harassment or sexual harassment in the workplace destroys the credibility of actual victims who come forward for the right reasons, which is to blow the whistle on somebody and denounce somebody who actually did it. It's just the same thing the way that Israel defenders have taken what used to be a reputation-destroying accusation, which is that somebody is anti-Semitic, and through overuse of it and over-exploitation to equate criticisms of Israel with anti-Semitism, has basically trivialized that accusation so that no one really minds anymore when they're accused publicly of that, because everyone knows it's exploited and overused. Same with racism accusations, same with white supremacy accusations, same with misogyny accusations. And this is what people like Anna Kasparian are doing to the important and noble progress that Me Too made, which is empowering women who have been harassed to come forward with consequences by weaponizing it in this way. Now that you're criticizing me publicly, I'm going to take this thing I've been holding in my pocket for 7 years and I'm going to use it against you. It reminds me of this video.
You do mess up somebody's pronouns. All you need to do is correct yourself and apologize. You don't need to fall over yourself saying, "Oh God, I totally love transgender people." Now, I've had people mess up my pronouns before, and to be perfectly honest, I tend to forget about it as soon as it happens, which is why I keep a little notebook around with me so I can write down the names of who did it and when they did it, because you never know when you're going to need a little leverage from time to time.
Now, again, if it were just Anna Kasparian weaponizing and deploying and exploiting accusations of basically blackmailing him, saying, if you continue to criticize us, I'm going to accuse you of sexual harassment, or threatening to punish him. Now that you've done this, I'm going to go punish you, not by attacking you politically the way you've been doing to me, but by claiming that you sexually harassed me in the workplace 7 years ago, something that I never told anyone before. I never warned other women about you. I kept it to myself, but I'm going to now weaponize it as punishment. This is going on in liberal politics and left-wing politics all the time. In 2020, there was a young gay mayor, Alex Morse, who was 31 years old, who challenged one of the scummiest and most corrupt members of the House of Representatives, the Democratic chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Richie Neal, and a bunch of college Democrats at Amherst conspired, as was ultimately reported by my colleague Ryan Grimm, working with other journalists, to leak that Mayor Morse was trying to date and groom adults, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old men, who went to school at the college where he was the mayor and where he was a lecturer. And it blew up in their face because Ryan Grimm and other reporters were able to prove that it was a fraudulent accusation opportunistically weaponized against Alex Morse by students who wanted to show Richie Neal that they had helped him to get a job in his office. But it basically ruined Alex Morse's reputation overnight. Left-wing groups that had endorsed him, like Sunrise Movement and Justice Democrats, and the working family parties and Congressman Jamal Bowman either said we're unendorsing him or we're freezing our endorsement of him. And only once it was proven to be this kind of scam did they then get back on board and re-endorse him. But had it not been for Ryan's reporting, had he not obtained the emails showing that it was fraudulent, it would have destroyed Alex Morse's reputation, because in left-wing circles, any kind of allegation that someone is grooming, that someone is sexually harassing, that someone is toxic, that someone is abusive, any of these magic words with no bereft of specifics, let alone evidence, instantly get believed. We just saw that in the New York City mayoral race, where this politician who I have no connection to or admiration for, he's just a standard establishment liberal, Scott Stringer, was the choice of the institutional left as the most viable candidate who at least was a little bit left-wing, who had a chance to win for mayor. They all endorsed him, the Sunrise Movement, Jamal Bowman, the Working Families Party, and out of nowhere, a lobbyist pops up, and she claimed that 18 years ago, in 2003, while they were dating, it turns out, she claimed that Scott Stringer groped her without her consent. And overnight, no evidence, no corroboration needed, they all withdrew their support for Scott Stringer. They demanded that he go into restorative justice programs. Many left-wing politicians instantly proclaimed him guilty or treated him as such, because in left-wing circles, these kinds of accusations that get weaponized are instantly believed, and they destroy people's reputation with no evidence. Here is she, the accuser, giggling and cackling the day after she did this and ruined his chances to win, celebrating the fact that she was able to do it. Watch her.
Today, what Gladys was talking about is I was all over the news because I was part of this Me Too press conference. I don't want to sound like a cliche, but I had to Me Too one of the politicians I used to work with because he couldn't keep his thing in his pants.
Oh.
Oh. Yeah. And I was watching myself on, New York One and the local news. I actually knocked Rudy Giuliani off of the top of the news. I mean, yeah, that's all.
Damn.
Now, there's been so many other examples of this with smaller media figures, with YouTubers, with commentators, where anonymous Twitter accounts or people who have no evidence just throw around these words trying to attach it to that person. That person is a groomer, that person is an abuser, that person harasses, that person is emotionally toxic, and instantly their reputation is destroyed. No evidence is required. Because what happened was, in the beginning of the Me Too movement, what people saw is that you can destroy even the most powerful people's reputation. Harvey Weinstein, plenty of big people in Hollywood, other corporate executives who were brought down by accusations that had no corroboration. And like I said, a lot of the early Me Too progress was important because women have had a hard time for a long time having their accusations be believed. But what other people saw was, wow, look at that power. Look what they did to Brett Kavanaugh with no evidence. Look at what they did to so many other people, let alone lesser figures who don't have the support or the defenses that other people have. Their reputations get instantly ruined in left-wing and liberal circles the minute accusations like this are made, because no evidence is required unless liberals have a lot at stake, in which case they'll demand tons of evidence before being believed, which is why Andrew Cuomo, despite being accused by 10 or 12 women of harassment, is still the governor of New York, even though Democrats control both houses of the legislature and could impeach him if they wanted to. It's the same reason they decided that Tara Reade was a mentally imbalanced liar, because there was too much at stake to allow her to accuse Joe Biden without evidence, so they completely shifted their evidentiary standard. Except when liberals care too much about the outcome, then these accusations get instantly vested with credibility. No due process, no evidence required, and my entire political worldview, if I can define it through anything, my entire journalistic approach is that human beings cannot be trusted with unchecked power because they will abuse it. And that's what this is. The ability to accuse somebody of sexual harassment, of being manipulative, of being toxic with no evidence and getting to ruin whoever's life you choose to ruin is a power that no human being should be trusted with. And the fact that Anna Kasparian held on to this for 7 years and then deployed it opportunistically to try and destroy the reputation of somebody who was criticizing her politics and the completely reckless and despicable practice of her program of accusing other people of being Russian agents to try and distract from what she did, accusing a journalist of being a paid agent of the Kremlin and working for dictators. She tried to use it to distract from it and destroy the reputation of a critic, regardless of what actually happened here, because of how this was exploited and weaponized, is itself despicable. And it is going on for way too long. It is almost impossible for people, especially heterosexual men who are most vulnerable to these kinds of tactics, to survive in liberal left politics, because at any moment anyone can accuse you of anything and no evidence is required. Scott Stringer has been in public life for 30 years. And out of the blue, someone pops up and for the first time ever accuses him of having groped her 18 years ago. She never told anybody about it, and his reputation and his candidacy is instantly destroyed. There are anonymous Twitter accounts right as we speak doing this against YouTubers and writers and commentators who are on the left or who are liberals, who are spouting opinions that people dislike, and even with no name attached to it, their reputations are getting ruined. So what Anna Kasparian did here with that little message, I've not said this about you, I've kept it to myself, but now that you're criticizing us, that's all going to change. That is grotesque. That is ethically repugnant. But it is also commonplace in liberal left politics as well. And that's why I wanted to talk about this episode for those two tactics. Fabricating accusations that someone is paid by the Russian government to discredit them and destroy their reputation, and weaponizing accusations of sexual harassment or other forms of toxicity and abuse, including against people who have never even met the supposed victim, knowing that people are too scared to defend anybody who's accused of that, because the minute you step forward and defend somebody accused of that, you yourself get accused. When I started defending Alex Morse, when those allegations first emerged, everybody who wanted to attack Alex Morse and defend Richie Neal said, oh, Glenn Greenwald's defending Alex Morse only for one reason, because Alex Morse likes to fuck teenage boys and so does Glenn Greenwald. Everyone knows what's going to happen if you try and defend somebody who's unjustly accused with no evidence in these cases. They count on that intimidation factor. And that's what was just done to Jimmy Dore, as well as punishment for his defense of Aaron Mate. So this has been a really ugly conflict. There's a lot more to it than that. If you're really interested, go on YouTube and watch the parties who have been involved defend themselves and explain it. But for me, these two components of what has driven it merit commentary, not just because in and of themselves in this case they're so revolting and repellent, but because they really have come to shape liberal discourse and Democratic Party politics in a way that is limitlessly toxic. Thanks for listening.